So, Frizzle Frontier, the big question for today's video is, could a book series be better if you read it out of order? And of course, you might be thinking, Chloe, that's preposterous. But I counter. Have you tested it? Obviously not. So I decided to test it. And I found some interesting things through this experiment. Let's break this down. The hypothesis of the experiment is skipping books in a series does not decrease my enjoyment of that series. Our set of experimental data is all of the books that I skipped around in the series while reading. And our control data set is all of the book ones I've read in the past year. And if we look at my average star rating for these two groups, we can make some conclusions. Now, this was a long project. I didn't intend for it to take this long when I started. And so over the course of this past year, I have gone through many swings of mood and feeling towards this project, prompted by different books I was reading. So there are 4 stages to this experiment. And the first book on our roster, 𝐂𝐇𝐀 and Other Lands, I rated it 3 stars. And in this video, I'm not going to be discussing every single book I read for this experiment because that'd be way too long. But if you want to hear me discuss every single book in this experiment, you can find that in the extended version of this video, which is available to my patrons on Ko-fi. Next was Artificial Night, book 3 in the October Daye series. And this was the book that really sparked this whole experiment, that really got me going. I wanted to read the October Daye series because I heard it was good. I also heard that it doesn't really get its feet until book 3. The book 1 and 2 you just kind of have to suffer through, and then book 3 is when the series really gets good. So, for the first time, I decided that I would just skip book 1 and book 2 and jump right into book 3. And what's the worst that can happen? And it turns out something really amazing happened. I think I enjoyed this book 3 way more than I would have if it had come after a mediocre book 1 and book 2. The thing that I loved about this book is that suddenly every character had a mysterious backstory. Suddenly, the world building, though oftentimes simple, was so intriguing and fresh and new. The rug was swept out from under me and I was led on a roller coaster through this book. For example, at some point in book 1 or book 2, or maybe before the events of book 1 or book 2, like our main character Toby gets turned into a fish. And this is very traumatic for her. And then here in book 3, there kept being characters making sly remarks to her, teasing her about fish and seafood and water, and trying to push her buttons that way. And she would refer to the dark times when she was away from the world. And it didn't spell it out for me that she had been turned into a fish. I had to piece this together over the course of the entire book, trying to figure out how everything fit. It turned all these elements of the book, the fish and other things, into puzzles, into intellectual stimulation that wouldn't have been there if I was reading these books in order. So this is one of the advantages of reading series out of order, which I'll get more into later. Then I read The Silver Bullets of Annie Oakley, 3 stars. Then The Observer Effect. And this is the book where I really decided that I wanted to make this an experiment, that I wanted to set this up, and I wanted to get to the bottom of this thing. Before this book, I was just dipping my toes and skipping books in a series. Then I read Land of the Dead, 2 stars, Locklands, 3 stars, then Emerald Blaze. And you'll remember that this stage of the experiment, I am cautious. I'm not just picking these books willy-nilly which ones I'm gonna skip around. I'm researching them and making some hard decisions. So why did I decide to pick up Emerald Blaze? I thought that it was for sure going to be a great candidate for skipping around. This book is written by Ilona Andrews. I've read another series by Ilona Andrews, the Kate Daniel series. But the Kate Daniel series, one of the things I really didn't like about that series is I felt like it had a lot of excessive recapping. I would be reading book 7 and it would spend way too long reminding me what had happened in book 6 and book 5 and book 4 and book 3 and book 1. And because I was binging all these books back to back, that was just like intolerable. I hated those sections of the book. The other sections of the book were great. But then I remembered, this is the style of the author, Ilona Andrews. They do a lot of recap in their books. This is perfect! So now if I'm going to be skipping a few books in the series, I can jump right into Emerald Blaze, and I'm sure there will be plenty of recap to fill me in on what I've missed. And I did rate this book 4 stars. What a success! But it did have a lot of recapping in it. And I discovered that the excessive recapping of previous books in a series bothered me just as much as when I'm actually reading a series in order. Which is just like a bonkers conclusion, right? Over the past year, when I've told people I'm doing this experiment, plenty of them have responded like, oh yeah, there are lots of books that have recaps of the previous books. That'll be really good for you. But you know what? It does not improve my enjoyment of the book. It irritates me just as much. I would much rather just have the mystery, and you only need to tell me the most important parts and work that in an organic way. Therefore, so far, what have I learned? Here are the pros of reading a series out of order. You get extra intellectual mysteries and puzzles. Series on average get better as they go on because the author is gaining in skill. And here's another thing. My buy-in is higher. I'm more willing to suspend my disbelief. If I open up book 1 and it's like confusing and there's ridiculous things happening that I don't understand, that might put me off the book. But if I'm reading like a book 4 and the opening is kind of confusing, I'm much more willing to go with the flow. I'm much more willing to write it out and see where it goes because I have to give the book the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, I am doing this wrong, not the book. But what are the cons to skipping a book 1? Obviously, you do not have as much emotional attachment to the story that most people going into like a book 2 have. And you're losing all the context for multi-book plot arcs and multi-book character arcs, which will then make those less powerful. So this is like a balancing act. On one hand, you've got these good things about skipping. On the other hand, you've got a good reason for reading books chronologically. So my question is, how do those balance out? Are they even? Is one of the sides better than the other? And that is the crux and the heart of this experiment, exploring that dichotomy. And having fun while I do it, because I love reading books. So after reading Emerald Blaze and having a great time with it, and coming to the realization that it doesn't matter how much recap a book has. If a book has more recap, that doesn't mean I'm gonna like it more, even if I'm skipping around. And that realization was enough to propel me out of cautious and into. And this is where things get crazy in the books that I was choosing. The first thing I did was I went to all the books I had on hold from the library. I'm a library girly. I love it, and I always have like at least 10 books on hold at any time. So I looked at all these holds I had for book 1s, and I canceled them, and I put holds for future books in the series. Because I wanted to push myself. I wanted a random selection of the books that I was currently interested in. Not cherry-picked by me, what I think might be the best for this experiment, the most likely to bring me joy. No, we're doing all the books. All those ones that I was gonna read book 1 for, not anymore. And the first of those holds that came in was Jade War. And this was the first time I paid for my recklessness. Because I have been so excited about reading this series. It sounds like something totally up my alley, and I think I'm gonna really enjoy it. And it totally pained me to not read the series in order because I want to give myself the best chance of enjoying it, and I was still in the headspace that like, what if I'm shooting myself in the foot? I was so terrified of skipping this. So you know what I did with this hold that came in for Jade War? I just canceled it. Because I was just so scared. I couldn't make myself start that book. But I had promised I wasn't going to start with book 1. I had to have this random sampling of the books I was interested in. So you know what I did? I put a hold on book 3, Jade Legacy. I just postponed the problem. I was like, I'll read a different book in the series, not this one. Obviously, a fantastic coping mechanism, right? That'll come up later. Then I read One Foot in the Fade. 1 star. Then we continued to push the envelope with another book that I had a hold on book 1. Book 2 is Hunger of the Gods. And this one's a little crazy because this is a super complicated, super lore-heavy, multi-POV epic fantasy book. Pretty much the absolute worst you could do in reading a series out of order, I think, are these types of series. But like, I was in reckless mode and I was ready to jump into this challenge. And the first hurdle I encountered was at the beginning of the book. There was a section that was the story so far. There was a section summarizing book 1 and giving me a detailed character list. When I first saw this, I was like, oh good, this will be useful. So I started reading it. Now this isn't a very long section, just like a few pages. And these few pages took me weeks of excruciating work to read, and I didn't even get through them. But this is what happened. I would open the book, and I would read like a few sentences of this plot summary, and I would just be so bombarded by this dense new information that I had no emotional or intellectual context for, and I would get overwhelmed and I would put the book down. And then the next day, I would say, we're gonna enjoy this book today. And I would open it up, and I would read a few more sentences. And then I would get so overwhelmed and not know what was going on, and I'd reread the first few sentences, and then I'd reread, and then I'd spend like 10 minutes just rereading the first paragraph over and over and just being like, what is happening? This makes me feel so sad inside. And then I would give up and pick up another book for a few days. And then I would go back to Hunger of the Gods and open it up and read a few more paragraphs and then get overwhelmed again, and this was a cycle. And finally, after 2 weeks of this, when I wasn't even halfway done, I decided this isn't for me. And I didn't read the rest of it, and I just started the book, which was much more readable than this. Now, I think for people who had already read book 1 but had forgotten some of it, this was really good as a refresher. Like, I'm not saying it was poorly written or anything, but if their intent was to make it so this was a good entry point into the series, no. Then, While Magic the Moon, 3 stars. Then, Third Grave, Dead Ahead, 4 stars. This is another one that I got because I had a hold on book 1, and then I decided to skip to book 3. And this is one of those series where my higher buy-in and suspension of disbelief came in handy. Because book 3 opens up and it's like, hello, I'm the Grim Reaper, and every time I close my eyes, I accidentally have dream sex with a demon. And I was like, how delightful, how entertaining, I am on board. I don't need to know what the backstory between you guys is. This is top tier entertainment, and I am ready. And I did really love reading a few more books in the series, and I'm planning to circle back to book 1 before continuing on, because I really like the writing style of these books, and I really like the energy, and I think part of that for me was because I came into the book with such an open mind, just being willing to accept any plot point that was thrown at me. And I think if I hadn't had such an open mind going into the book, maybe I wouldn't have been so excited about this plot point. We'll see after I read book 1 and 2 if my opinion changes for that moment. But then we entered the most reckless of all of my decisions. I wanted to read the book that was most counterintuitive, the worst book that I could think of to read out of order. And then if I read that one and I liked it, it would be a way to prove my hypothesis that reading series out of order doesn't decrease your enjoyment, right? What would be like the worst book to read out of order? And the series that came to my mind was Malazan. And I explained this plan and how I chose the book to my sister in an audio message, so I'm just gonna play you that because I can't recapture the utter emotion of that moment.
I'm not going to start with number 1, right? We're going to put this to the test. And then I thought, well, which number will I start with? Just like number 2? And I thought, no, if I'm really putting this to the test, we got to make this into a game. We got to make this fun. So I put all of the book titles on like a electronic spinner wheel, except for book 1. And then I spinned it to decide which book I would read. And you know what the spinner picked for me? No joke. The last book. Like book 25. It's like 900 pages. So I put it on hold. And I'm kind of really excited because obviously this is the worst plan ever, but somehow also the best plan ever. And it's even better that it was literally decided randomly for me by fate. So it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous that I am going to be reading the last book. And we're going to see how I like it.
SparkNotes version. I liked parts of it. I really didn't like the writing style. And I didn't like how confused I was. And so I didn't get farther than 2 chapters. But after all of these hard lessons and the books I didn't enjoy as much after my reckless phase of choosing hard books on purpose, I entered. So next I picked up Be the Serpent, book 16 of the October Day series. So now I'm in the awkward position of having only read book 3 and book 16 of this series. I definitely had a positive experience with this book. Obviously, I was missing so much in that gap of books between books 3 and book 16. But what helped is I could see some thematic connections between the books. I could see some character arcs that hadn't yet started in book 3 and that were already completed by book 16. And I did get some satisfaction out of that, in addition to the fun mystery puzzles. So really, it was kind of the best of both worlds. Then I picked up The Dragon's Promise, 1 star. And then I had once again a hold come in from the library for Jade Legacy, the book 3. And I was like, Chloe, you just gotta do it. You just gotta face your fear and do it. You're gonna have a great time. You've read plenty of books you've liked during this experiment. This one's gonna be no different. It'll be fine and great. So I finally started it. And I read the first chapter and I really liked it. I really liked the writing style and I was getting a handle on the characters and what was going on. And then I had a realization. You might call it an enlightenment. Because I was really liking book 3. And then I thought, but wouldn't you probably be liking this more? This kind of series where there's obviously lots of connections to previous politics things if you had read books 1 and 2 first? And I thought about that, and I read books for fun. And I realized that me being a stickler for putting this book in the data set, for reading this book out of order, was just making me unhappy. And so I decided to put down this book and go back to putting a hold on book 1. And so this is not in the data set of the experiment. This is what finally brought me to enlightenment, along with another realization. Let's have a little aside over here and talk about spoilers. Let's talk about fear. Over the course of this experiment, I was encountering a ridiculous number of spoilers in every single circumstance. And the question is, does getting spoiled for a book really ruin it? But here's something that I really think the worst part of being spoiled is centered in your emotional reaction to it. Whether or not receiving the information of spoilers actually decreases your enjoyment when you consume the book is up in the air. But I do know that when you receive a spoiler, you have the fear, the thinking of, oh no, this has just ruined my reading experience. You're anticipating this future pain and disappointment, and that is making you feel pain in the moment because of your fear of the future. So if we can take the fear out of spoiling things, if you can receive a spoiler and just not care at all, that'll make everything better, right? Because yeah, maybe technically you would have enjoyed the book more of not being spoiled, but depending on the book, it's probably only going to be a little bit, honestly. So most of the unhappiness from spoilers comes from the fear of spoilers. So how do you overcome an irrational fear of spoilers? You purposely expose yourself to spoilers over and over again. And it was around this time in the experiment that I also realized that I was doing this, that I was slowly, accidentally reaching a point of spoiler enlightenment. It wasn't scary to be spoiled anymore. I just didn't care. And honestly, I'd call that a win. But even if the only thing I'd gained from this experiment was less of a fear of spoilers, I would have called it worth it. All this work, totally worth it. Because I think long term, this new perspective I have on spoilers is really going to help me be happier in my reading habits and my discussions of books. So, tangent over. We are now in... Next was Queen of Nothing, book 3 in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I read book 1 as a buddy read with my sister, which was a lot of fun. And then she went on to read book 2 before I did. And then after she finished it, she called me up, all disappointed and angry, because she really didn't like book 2 for a lot of reasons that she wanted to rant to me about. And then she asked the question like, wait, have you read book 2 yet? And then I thought, no, I haven't. But do I really care about these spoilers? Do I really care if she rants on and on about this to me? And I realized that I would really achieve more joy listening to my sister rant about this book than I would reading it for myself, probably. And so right then and there, I just decided I'm gonna skip book 2 and just read book 3. Proceed, sister, and tell me the entire plot of book 2 and why you didn't like it. And so she did. And I just felt in that moment so accomplished and enlightened, so detached from the sphere of spoilers that used to chain me down. Then I read Hate Machine and 3 stars. Then, the capstone of this project, A Court of Mist and Fury. How did I decide that this would be the end of the experiment and the capstone? You can watch my review video for this one. But in the end, a big factor was because the series has the reputation, like, just wait till book 2, that's when it gets good. And I was already kind of on the fence about reading this series, and then I realized, wait a minute, I can just skip to the better book and read it. And I liked it. 4 stars. Okay, we're taking it down to sitting because my knees are hurting from standing so long. The extended version of this video is long. So, what is the conclusion of this video? My hypothesis, skipping books in a series will not decrease my enjoyment of those books. So what's the conclusion there? Do I like it better when I skip around? The stats say that it's inconclusive. My average star rating for skipped books was 2.83. Not looking too hot there. My average for first books in the past year was 3.13. Obviously, this is a 0.3 star difference. You would think that this means, like, obviously, you're not liking books as much when you skip them. But then if we run a statistical analysis on this of, is this enough data to really call it? Because if I only had like 5 books that I had skipped, obviously we couldn't trust that average. It wouldn't have enough data behind it to be more than coincidence. I just didn't get enough data points for anything to be statistically significant. My final conclusions are, I will skip books as I wish to. I will skip books when it makes sense. When a book in a series has a reputation of being less good than the rest of the books in the series, we can just skip it. Whatever. I am unburdened by my fear and cowardice of reading a series sequentially. I am unburdened now and enlightened from my fear of spoilers, mostly. I'm still a little afraid of them. We're working on it. But I'm not just going to be applying this willy-nilly, because obviously there are some books that are better read in order. What a stunning conclusion, right? What an obvious conclusion. But I can say that I proved it to myself, not to the science data world. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this video in the comments.